Hello, my friends, and welcome to the other side of the 4th of July. Welcome to a new beginning, perhaps, for the United Kingdom. We have, as a country, rather resoundingly decided to remove the Tories from power, and now we have a Labour government that enjoys a majority more than twice as large as the one the Tories won at the previous general election. So that, in some regards, speaks volumes as to the public mood. Although with our first past the post system, it's also the case that maybe the election hasn't completely, fully judged the public mood. If we had proportional representation, then basically Labour would still have the majority of the seats in Parliament, but they wouldn't necessarily have a working majority. And we would also see a couple of other parties fare very, very well. Now, some of these parties are parties that I really do not agree with in terms of their political stances, and some of them are parties I can absolutely get behind. So you have to take the rough with the smooth in that respect. One of the parties that would do very, very well out of proportional representation would be Reform, and I really cannot speak as to how much I do not like this, because Reform are basically the hard right. They are driven by the same populist mania that gave us the folly of Brexit. Indeed, Reform's leader, Nigel Farage, pushed very, very hard for Brexit, and, well, we've seen what a shambolic idea that's proven to be. And the bottom line is, someone like Farage, who in many respects cozies up to someone like Vladimir Putin, you know, do we want someone like that in power? Do we want a party like that, led by him, to have more influence in Parliament? I, for one, really don't. I mean, to give you another idea, there's at least one MP, and who knows, well, Tory's an MP, to be fair, but there's at least one member of Reform, and who knows how many he speaks for, who believes that Britain should have been neutral in World War II, that we should have let Hitler do what he wanted. Again, what does that speak to as to Reform? And you know what? Yes, I understand it's not fair to tarnish the entire batch with a few bad apples, but equally, by the same token, when you've got comments like this, among others, how much does that say as to what lurks beneath the surface? Under proportional representation, Reform would have somewhere around like sort of 75 seats, which is an obscenely high number for a party like that, a party that, you know, as I say, I fundamentally disagree with. But on the flip side, the Green Party would also have around about 75 seats, and the Green Party, for me, are a party that if I felt they had a genuine chance of actually winning the general election, and if we had proportional representation to grant them a crack at having more seats, then they are absolutely a party that I can get behind. I think their policies make sense. I think their policies are kind. I think, if you're looking for perhaps a true left-wing party, then the Greens are the party to look at, because Labour, they're often presented as being the left wing to the Tories' right wing, but they are, at the moment at least, very middle of the road. They are trying to appeal to as many people as possible. In some respects that makes sense, because, they want to attract sort of Tory voters in particular. But in other respects, it leaves you wondering exactly what they stand for. What are their policies going to be? Are they going to undertake policies that will have a measurable impact on people's lives? Or are we going to see more of the same, just watered down? At any rate, removing the Tories from power was important, because the Tories have been, as I've said before, shambolic. over the span of the past 14 years, and in particularly since they put Boris Johnson in charge, we've seen the country go downhill, and we've seen his replacements flounder quite miserably as well. So it's good that they're gone. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely good that they're gone. It's vital that they're gone, because I don't think this country could have survived another 5 years of their inept, self-serving rule. I really don't. And perhaps the scale of Labour's victory will offer up an opportunity. But equally, it's worth noting, and this is a viewpoint I've seen elsewhere, did Labour win the election or did the Tories lose it? And I think when you stop and you look, it's probably fair to say that the Tories lost more than Labour actually won. And the Tories lost big time, they've been reduced to, I think, what was said to be their worst ever result in a general election. It's been a hammer blow, and it's been coming. The writing's been on the wall for some time now, and the public mood, what with, a cost of living crisis that they've not controlled properly, what went on during the COVID pandemic, including the Partygate issues, and a host of other problems. We've just seen the public turn on the Tories. They've just been absolutely hopeless, and they've been hopeless for a very, very long time. So the public had enough, and I think in many cases they felt that the only real alternative that could govern the country even remotely successfully was Labour. Although there are also scores of seats that have gone from the Tories to the Liberal Democrats, a lot of those being in the south-west of the country, because a lot of people there, I think, probably couldn't stomach voting for Labour, and thus they decided to go for the next most likely means to remove the Tories. And in doing so, we've seen some high-profile Tory casualties at this election. Jacob Rees-Mogg lost his seat. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss lost her seat. And scores of other ministers lost their seats. Also, the seats that were once held by former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Theresa May also changed hands, with Boris Johnson's former seat turning to Labour. And I can't remember who took Theresa May's former seat. I don't know if it was Labour or the Lib Dems, but either way, that's another former Tory PM seat which has changed hands. So that should strike a particularly strong note as to what people felt about the Tories. Ordinarily, the seats held by Prime Ministers and former Prime Ministers, you kind of see them as largely being a safe bet, but not this time. Not this time. Rishi Sunak held on to his seat, but that's sort of academic really, because having presided over this disastrous loss, he will inevitably resign at some stage as Tory party leader, and they'll begin the process of seeking a replacement. A replacement who has some decisions to make. Do the Tories drive harder to the right in order to try and woo people who abandon them for the Reform Party? Do they try and recapture the middle ground in some way, shape or form, and present themselves as a moderate voice in some ways? And how do they manage the inevitable confrontation between these two factions within the party that are pulling in different directions, and to a degree for different reasons? So the Tory shambles is arguably not over yet. They can't do any damage to the country now, but we can certainly watch as they continue to, perhaps in the short term, consume themselves and argue with themselves as to the direction of the party and who should lead the party. But we shouldn't be, clapping our hands with glee too much, because it's important to remember that Labour are not necessarily a 100% united party. There are Labour politicians out there who perhaps think Keir Starmer is too safe, who he won't necessarily enact some of the ideals and policies that you think Labour should actually do. I personally voted Labour because I didn't want the Tories to stay in power. Unfortunately, in my location, the Tories did stay in power, albeit only just. But I honestly think that Labour are the lesser of two evils, but I don't necessarily think they're a superb party to vote for. I just think they're the lesser of two evils. I would have loved to see Jeremy Corbyn's Labour get into power. I honestly, genuinely believe he would have been a great Prime Minister. He would have looked after people in the working class a lot more than I think Keir Starmer will. But nonetheless, Keir Starmer is now Prime Minister, and time will be the judge, as it so often is. Time is the judge of us all, and it will judge certainly what happens with Keir Starmer's Labour in power. If he can ease the situation with the cost of living, if he can perhaps sort out genuine, real life, real world wage increases to tie in with inflation, if he can do something about the sewage and pollution in our rivers without having the water companies charge the British public to fix their own mistakes, if he can do something about the energy bill crisis that we've had, if he can do all of that, then, or at least if he can be seen to be making progress with that, then he will have a good chance of winning the next election. It's going to come down to, I think, as it sometimes often does, the difference will be people's pockets. Because rightly or wrongly, a lot of people will vote in accordance to how it's going to benefit them. And then other issues tend to come up in a sort of somewhat secondary way. We get the scare tactics like immigration, which is one of Reform's platforms. In fact, you could argue it's their only platform. But that's really just an excuse and a distraction from the issues that actually really matter. So we'll have to see what Starmer does on the subject of immigration, because it is a hot button for a lot of people, especially people who've sort of defected to the Reform Party and supported them. If they actually see a measurable impact on immigration, as much as it's a sideshow, perhaps some of them will kind of shift away from Reform a little bit, although there's more to it than that. The whole thing is kind of a bit of an unknown at the moment. As I say, time will be the judge. And if Labour make progress on some of those core issues, then even if they haven't completely fixed them, because I don't think you can expect wholesale complete successes in 5 years in politics, but if they look like they're making progress, if it looks like these problems around things like the cost of living and that kind of thing are changing for the better, and that people have, perhaps a bit more disposable income in their pockets. If it feels like there are more opportunities out there in the next sort of 5 years, then people will probably be inclined to vote Labour again. As it is, the chances of people voting the Tories back in 5 years' time, you would argue, are somewhat low. The scale of the challenge here is massive for them. They almost have to rebuild from the ground up. But until they pick a direction and stick with it, they're going to struggle to do even that. If they look like they're squabbling among themselves when they should be in opposition, then people won't take them seriously. Labour have to be careful, because they can't use that as an excuse to do whatever they want, because they will come under scrutiny. But nonetheless, it hands them an opportunity that they cannot afford to waste. We shall see what happens.